Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Rocket Lab Weekly. This is episode 43. We're closing in on 52, which would mark a full year of doing this show every week. And this is an exciting one because we have an almost full house. We have Dave G in the house and Matt Farley. How is your guys' week? Or how was your week?
Pretty good. You guys may know I'm a Tesla shareholder, so we had that big drop in the stock after the earnings call. But, I'm still quite happy with how it's gone over the past couple months, so I'm not complaining at all about that. But it was a big day.
It's so tricky because some of the stocks have run up so much that you were like, I was really expecting a pullback. And Tesla is very tricky because it's like, if you look at from where it came from, it's still much higher than it was, but it is a big pullback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they weren't great earnings, so.
Yeah. But at the same time, I was thinking, like, my logic on Tesla was that it's like there was a mentality shift and it's more like an AI robo company, and everybody knew that the numbers are going to suck, and then the numbers come out, they suck, and then everybody's like,
Yeah,
it felt like an overreaction.
Yeah, I mean, not to turn this into Tesla Weekly or anything, but yeah, the margins have been squeezed, and it's not just them. Look at Ford, look at any auto company, and I think when rates start to drop and the environment gets a bit better, they'll get better margins again on their vehicles. But it's really all about autonomy anyway. So anyway,
all right, Matt, how was your week?
Good. Yeah, sorry, I just had another call. Pretty good. The market recovered a little bit, and so it was pretty decent. I think it's pretty funny when you see a little bit of a pullback to see how quickly people get scared. But then when you look at, where we are and how far up we are in terms of year-to-date returns, it's barely even scratching the surface of a slight pullback. So I think much more to come. I think there's going to be a lot of uneasiness with respect to the bogginess of the market. There's a lot of uncertainty with respect to U.S. elections, with respect to interest rates, with a lot of things. And so with that, obviously drives volatility in the markets. But overall, you can't complain. So nice to see a little bit of a healthy pullback, in my opinion. Google still had some good results, regardless of whether or not the stock pulled back pretty well. So nice from a perspective of somebody that's looking 5 to 10 years out.
Awesome. So let's begin the Rocket Lab Weekly part of this section. And let's start with the news that we have a new launch announced. That's for the Japanese company Synspective. As far as I understand, this is still not the new launch contract. It's the old one that so it's not the plus 10 one that they have ordered. There's, I believe, 2 left, and this is one of them that is going to fly. My question to you guys is, this quarter is really going to be a make or break we're going to see how many launches we're going to get this year, because obviously if this quarter is going to be 3 launches, we have had 4, that's 8 launches, then we would be at 11 at the end of this quarter. Mm-hmm. It's a very long way away from 22. I updated my Rocket Lab valuation model, and I will take it after you guys a little bit as for the launches. But we can start with Dave. Like, what do you think? How many launches are we getting, and how important is this for the overall Rocket Lab thesis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely glad they're able to squeeze this launch into the end of the month, assuming there's no weather issues or any other holds or anything like that. But I think overall, I do think they tend to pick up the cadence in the back half of the year for whatever reason. I still hope maybe 17, 18 launches for the year. I think 22 is no longer really achievable. And we even saw with this previous launch, the scheduling keeps changing and customers not being ready or whatever. But I've kind of tried to stress about the rocket schedule and focus less on the individual number of launches each quarter and stuff like that. With Electron, I think going forward, the most important thing is everything they've learned going into Neutron, because, it's still going to be a nice little business for them going forward. but really like little is the operative word when you talk about small launch and 8 million per launch versus 50 million per launch. So as long as they don't go out of business because of Electron before Neutron gets going, then, you know, everything will be fine. And as Peter told us, those customers have already paid. So it's really just a matter of time until they launch. They're not getting their money back, even if they have to delay.
Yeah. Cool, Matt.
Yeah, I think it all just depends, right? I think that there's still some optimization that can be done from a Electron scheduling perspective that would allow them to meet that manifest of 20 to 22 launches in a year, right? I'm not saying this year. So I think that there's a possibility that cadence isn't far-fetched. We've seen, you know, the delay is based off the partners pushing things out. So I think that there's some rigor to it. But I guess from a Rocket Lab perspective, exactly what David alluded to, it doesn't really impact their bottom line because they get the cash, you know, 90% of it up front anyway. So it's, you know, neither here nor there. For me, it's more about the visibility, because I don't think a lot of people actually dig into that or have that, you know, knowledge, because we've been fortunate to sit with Peter and have that conversation and understand fully about, you know, how that kind of working capital piece of that part of the business works. But I think overall, you know, the total addressable market of small launch and just launch in general is continuing to grow. And while it might not necessarily be 20 launches this year, it might be a short-term headwind for the stock in that respect. But in 10 years' time, I think we're going to be in the same spot that we should be, right? So I don't think it's necessarily going to be, you know, a huge impact to whether or not we actually get to where we need to go. And to me, that's really what's more important, is Neutron and getting the right cadence and continue to build relationships. And regardless of these delays, I think what we've continued to see since Bective has signed up for another, you know, dozen launches or so, and I'm sure Black Sky is about to be on the next launch as well, where they're about to run out of their signed up launches. So I'm sure they're going to be signing up for, you know, a dozen more launches in the future going forward, and they're about to hit EBITDA positive, or they have hit EBITDA positive for the last 2 quarters. So hopefully they can start to expand a little bit more rapidly with their launches. Anyway, I just think that it's a short-term sort of thing. And at the end of the day, the thing that makes me most excited is, and this is something we've said, you know, over the past 40 some or so shows, is that, you know, Rocket Lab is the one that is ready, and it's the partners that are ones that are, they're kind of dragging their feet. And I'm kind of honestly very much, how do I say this? I think it's kind of harsh at the same time that they kind of say the partner's not ready. The partner asks for a push, but at the same time, I think it's reasonable, right? I think it's because otherwise that, you know, you're trying to save face for somebody that, you know, isn't necessarily keeping your timeline in order, right? So it's like, well, it's nice to be able to be like, oh, you know, these guys weren't ready, so we'll say the launch was scrubbed because of X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, in reality, you're taking some of that reputational hit for something that's not your problem, right? You guys are ready. You guys are ready to go, but your partner isn't. So I originally was kind of like, oh, it kind of sounds faux pas to like push it onto the partner. But at the same time, it's like, I completely understand, right? Like right now, for example, it's like I'm dealing with something in my personal life. It's like, well, it's not my fault, but unfortunately, it still kind of hits my reputation anyway. You know, so it's, even though somebody else messed up, you know, that's just business in some cases. But I'm glad to see that Rocket Lab's pushing back a little bit on that.
I guess one other piece to that is, and I know like this isn't what people love to hear, but because we're always talking about the future and like when is the future now for Rocket Lab, but you know, it's an easier comp for next year. So it, you know, assuming their cadence continues to ramp in 2025, if you're comparing to 17, 18 launches instead of 22, the growth will appear better, at least at that point, maybe.
Yeah, it's very true. It's like a bad year this year. It makes for easy comps for next year. I actually did update my Rocket Lab valuation, and I think, Dave, this week you also did a video about how the thesis changed on Rocket Lab. And what was very interesting is I had 22 launches for this year. I lessened it to 8, but I had them at 7.5 million. the reason why I'm going into this so much is because I think that this is something that if we have like a very good earnings, but we have bad guidance on the launches, like it's something that could tank the stock. And I think I wanted to see like if the stock tanks, is that rational, and how does it change the calculation? And I updated also like going into the future. So in 2025, I only put it to 20 Electron launches and 1 neutron launch, and 2 neutron launches, and 24 in 2026. But something which is very surprising is Space Systems has been going a lot better than expected, and we are still easily on the track to be 400 million if they actually do the 110 million or in that ballpark this quarter. And then they don't even have to have growth in the last 2 quarters to reach 400 million this year. And basically, the Space Systems part then more than makes up for all that we lose on the launch. And then going forward, I just had a multiple that the Space Systems is going to grow 25% every year. And obviously, if I raised this year, then the base is higher. Am I sharing my screen or am I? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can see your spreadsheet.
Okay, good. And what was interesting is that after all this calculation, like the price basically stayed pretty much the same. And obviously it's because I was thinking that Rocket Lab is going to be around $20 without counting anything for the space infrastructure. For some reason, some people get very upset when I say that my 2030 price target, this is a very conservative, pessimistic price target, is $20. But the point of this, what I'm trying to say is that with this change, a space system is doing very good. It barely changes anything. So if the market would sell off on this news, I think it would be a completely irrational sell.
Yeah, to me, I mean, I've said it so many times, but Space Systems has been like such the MVP of the entire business. And we're hearing about massive investments in their Solero business. And, the government's giving them like 50 million, federal is 25 and state is 25 as well. So when you see some of these announcements, you're like, okay, maybe I have to increase my projected Space Systems growth even more in the future. We saw that 150 million contract for Solero last quarter. So yeah, all this makes me feel okay about Electron.
But yeah, I think a 15% ops margin is kind of light. I think it'll grow. The gross margins are going to try to get closer to the mid 30s, if not hopefully the 40s. And with that, I mean, then you just have the drag of SG&A and some other costs associated with just running the business. So I'm hoping that you get closer to 25%, from an operating margin perspective. And at the end of the day, hopefully you get closer to 500 million in sort of net income by the end of the decade. But then you could get a little bit closer towards, in my opinion, closer to $20 billion in market cap. But we'll see, right? That's all topping so many different multiples on top of each other, right? And growth rates. And so, you kind of have to take it step by step.
Yeah. And what's so interesting with Rocket Lab is it's so hard to calculate with certain things, because if they start the space infrastructure and it goes really, really good, even the 25% could be a low margin, right? But we don't even know what is their space. Like, we just know that they're planning something, but so it's like it's impossible to almost project it into the future. And I wanted to show a graph here, which I think is this is why I'm afraid of selling call options on Rocket Lab. This is ASTS, and a moment of silence for Dave, who wanted to buy this at $6.
No, sorry. I wanted to buy Redwire. I don't think I did look at AST a couple times. I didn't want to buy them because they don't really have revenue yet. So, but anyway, go ahead, and still an interesting one to talk about.
This comment, Vincent just put up the Rocket Lab chart for 2025. Amen. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the stock, like this company is not a launch company, not a space systems company. They're a space infrastructure company, and they're pre-revenue at this point. And the only reason why the stock price has gone from about $2 in May to $16 in 3 months, so that's like a 9x in 3 months, is because their satellites are getting done. They have made some pre-contracts with some big companies, and they're getting ready to launch the space infrastructure. And it's like, when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, when Rocket Lab announces what they're planning to do, and the minute that the market can, put some dates and numbers, and even if it's just guesstimates, I think we should see a similar reaction in the stock. It's my opinion, but
it's possible. I mean, we're looking at AST being valued, I believe it's over 5 billion now. So that's like over double Rocket Lab on zero revenue.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because when Rocket Lab gets to this point, they will also have the rockets and the space systems piece, as well as their own application. So
the thing that's pretty interesting to me is, yes, they've got deals with, say, the major broadband providers, the major cell phone providers, but they don't have any satellites in space, as Dave said. And
well, they have one, but it's like a test satellite.
Yeah. So who is actually going to be the one who launches these? And they're saying Falcon 9 is going to be the rocket. It's like, well, how enthusiastic do you think SpaceX is going to be to launch these satellites into space? And I guess maybe if you're thinking about it from a pure SpaceX perspective, then sure, he's probably okay. But at the end of the day, he has to think about Starlink as well, and how it'll cannibalize potentially the growth rate of that. So it's like, other than ULA at $100 million a pop, or waiting for a neutron, then who exactly can he rely on to be able to put these rockets or these satellites into space?
No one right now, yeah. And even on the other side of things, I don't think AST is keen to give their money to a SpaceX who will be competing in Starlink versus the AST satellites. So I feel like, they're another one where as soon as there's another viable option available, they probably don't want to be launching on SpaceX either.
Yeah. We have some crazy trade here in the chat. Curtis Von Kampen, he bought ASTS at $3 and sold it at $12.50. And he says, no regrets, provided some needed funds to buy more Rocket Lab. I mean, hats off to you, my man. That was an amazing, that's one of the best trades I've seen in a long time.
That's brave, because it's kind of ironic, but it's almost like now that the company is at this level, it's safer. When it was valued in the $2 range, it didn't have any revenues. The cash on the balance sheet wasn't looking that hot. I was very scared for the company, but now this run up, they can raise more capital if they need to. They did get an investment from Google and I think a mobile network operator as well, but it's just funny how the stock price can, de-risk the company as well.
Yeah. And I did a fast analysis on this stock. I also did a video about them, that if the analyst projections are correct and you count with a very conservative, I think it was like a 20 PE, when their space infrastructure is ready in 2026, the stock price on a 20 PE would be $64.
Wow.
And so it's even like, but you have a huge execution risk, right? Because like everything has to go right and everything has to go according to analysts. So it's so interesting what you're saying, that yes, the company is much, much safer now than it was at $2. And it still has a crazy high upside if you believe in the projections. I personally like Rocket Lab more. I feel like on the short term, I think this company is going to do, the stock price is going to do better than Rocket Lab, but I would not want to be competing with, companies that have the keys to space, can manufacture their own satellites, and can compete with you in this business. Like doesn't feel like a good recipe.
Yeah, I liked the end-to-end vision better of Rocket Lab, but I do hope they raise capital here. I feel like You know, it'd be so much less risk if they did. Reminds me kind of Astra when their stock price mooned and they never raised capital or issued more shares. Like things could have been so different if they had. But I like their business plan that they're making all these deals with the mobile network operators, not trying to get customers directly like a Starlink is. So they've got a lot of memorandums of understanding in place with AT&T, Verizon, and all these people. So it's possible they really pull it off.
Yeah, and what's really smart in their strategy is they offered equity to some of the companies. I think 80, and then if you own equity in this company, and then you also want to refer your customers to buy service from this. So I think it's a very brilliant strategy what they have, but still, the company today is zero revenues, and you're buying into a dream, and huge execution risk.
But could you bring yourself to, if I don't know, even if it could be worth 60 one day, I just struggle buying a stock at 18 knowing it was at 2 like 2 months ago. I don't know. I just can't bring myself to do it. Could you?
I mean, if I believed in it enough, I could, because of where it's going. But I mean, I understand the. It's a very special one. You don't see this every day. Like it's really, yeah. I think my answer would be, if it was any other company, no. But I kind of understand why the stock did what it did, and then it's like you're looking more into the future, not in what was in the past.
I think it's because you have big players involved. Like you have the big cell phone provider names, and people think that this is their opportunity to invest in a Starlink-like company. While they probably still don't have the opportunity to invest in Starlink themselves. And so, but I still think that there's a fundamental misvaluation of the company with respect to not necessarily having any true, I guess, active satellites that are meant for commercialization in space. And that's going to take a lot of capital to get there. And so until that sort of happens, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yes, they had the first 5 satellites ready, but there's a big step that needs to happen between there. But is it worth that speculation? I guess. But yeah, I think if it goes much more than this, I shouldn't. I would be very weary if it doubles from here, because that would be a 10 billion plus valuation. And I feel like then you're paying for a lot of revenue, and you're paying for a lot of income. Years, if not a decade ahead of time. So I think that would be tough.
And don't forget, Starlink is also working on direct to mobile. So
yeah, and keep in mind that here the technology is not proven. So what if they launch the satellites and then for some reason it turns out that they need much more satellites, or it's not exactly what they thought it would be? That's number one. Number two is the analyst numbers are based on analyst projections of how many people will sign up to the satellite internet, and that's also a big question mark, right? Because it's based on like surveys and people's guesses, and what if there is a less amount of sign up? So it really is a lot of risk involved in this company.
I will say, it sounds like their first Blue Walker 1 satellite did perform relatively well for their tests, so that is something, I guess. Very large too, by the way, if anyone's curious, kind of the differentiation. These satellites are much more massive than the Starlink ones, which should hopefully help out in the direct to mobile piece, where Starlink originally was planned to go to the antennas on the ground.
Yeah. Cool. So then we switch to the next news, which goes back to Rocket Lab. It's funny. It feels like, now that I've been doing Rocket Lab Weekly for a long time, it feels like they make sure to give us an update about their space systems and a neutron update, whatever that update is. But it's like consistently every week they are trying to give us something. So on the space systems, it feels like the Escapade missions is going to ship out soon from Rocket Lab, which is, I don't know how they do the revenue recognition on this one, but I guess it would be connected with a big revenue recognition on the shipment. And then it's supposed to fly on a New Glenn, which I'm not sure is ready. So it's going to be interesting what happens with that satellite. What do you guys know about this? And yeah, do you think it's going to fly on the New Glenn in October? Was it planned, or?
I think it was supposed to be September originally, but I don't think there's any way New Glenn flies that soon. But yeah, I assume Rocket Lab will have realized all the revenue on that by now. I think it's amazing to see them building satellites going to other planets. So just hope that launch goes well for Blue Origin, you know, so when it's out of their hands.
It's a super risky launch to make your first orbital launch into another planet. And I just want to remind people that SpaceX on the Falcon Heavy, when they launched Musk's cherry red Tesla, was supposed to go into Martian orbit, and they missed after, I don't know how many launches SpaceX did before they went to that launch. So
yeah, it was a little different though, because it was the Falcon Heavy as opposed to the 9, but yeah.
I just mean that they have had like flight experience on other vehicles, right? Like, yeah. I mean, I guess you could say Blue Origin also has flight experience with the New Shepard, but it still hasn't been to orbit. I don't know if you can.
Very different.
Matt, any thoughts on this one?
It's an interesting landscape. Very curious to see where it ends up. But yeah, I think I hope that New Glenn goes well the first time, but generally it takes a few trials, right? So
go big or go home. Yeah, that's what they're doing on New Glenn.
Blue Origin may also just have a bit of a different design philosophy, where SpaceX is like break and fix and test fast. And when you look at a ULA, like they'll only launch when that thing is good and ready, even if it takes like 10 plus years or whatever of development. So maybe they skew more towards that side of things and they're a bit more confident. But I think it's great to show the capability of Rocket Lab satellite. Not trivial going to another planet by any means.
Yeah. Yes, and then we also got a neutron update. As I said, for some reason, we're not getting this hot fire. I understand now a little bit after all of our crowd research that there's a lot of tweaking and tuning. I really hope it comes before the earnings call. And I guess that the PR team was sitting and they're like, we need to give a neutron update. What are we going to do? Okay, let's take a picture of this big piece that we're doing. But at the same time, it's still part of Neutron. All the infrastructure, all the tanks, all the stage 1, stage 2 also has to be done. So do you guys think we're getting this hot fire before earnings? And what's your view on Neutron development?
I mean, I think, you know, these pictures that they shared are very important as well and very interesting. I wonder, like, there's a chance it's already happened, and at this point, they're just going to wait for the earnings call to share that information with us. Wouldn't it shock me? So, and ever since they showed some of those spin tests on Archimedes and those other things, again, I'm a little bit less anxious to see it. So,
yeah,
I'm in the same boat. Yeah, I think it's already happened personally. Well, Dave didn't say that, but he said he wouldn't be surprised if it's already happened. I'm in the boat where I personally think it has happened, and then we'll probably see more during the earnings report and maybe some of the tweakings that they've done. Right, that's generally what Rocket Lab does. They don't just come to an earnings report to show you the financials. They come to the earnings report and they show you a little bit more in depth as to what's going on in the organization from a technology and engineering perspective. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you hear about one of the findings or some of the findings that they have found that they're going to implement into the building of the Archimedes engine going forward, or even if it has implications on the neutron design itself.
Yeah, that would be very interesting if they come up with something that changes the design of the rocket, because I mean, like, the pieces are being made as you see on this picture, so that would really suck if they would have to go back and I guess that they have to be very confident that this engine should work, right? Because they're making all these pieces. So
Yeah. I mean, you've seen all sorts of test fires from Relativity. We haven't seen, large structures like this and Relativity. Yeah. So, they better be confident that Archimedes this is the design they're going to go with. And I think they even kind of said like the rocket on the test stand is a production rocket. It's not like some kind of Pathfinder type thing. So,
yeah. All right. One very interesting thing, I had an interview with Ashley Vance yesterday, and I thought I saw a lot of interviews with him and, read his book, saw the film, and I didn't think I would get surprised by some of the things that he said, but it became very clear to me that he's probably the most qualified person to do due diligence on rocket companies, because he has been to countless rocket companies on many continents. He was the first journalist to ever visit the ICBM factory in Ukraine, which is Firefly's factory. And it was so interesting because I asked him, how did he choose Rocket Lab, Astra, and Firefly for his book? Because we have the benefit of hindsight now, and Peter Beck mentions many times that they were not the preordained winners, and it was Virgin, like Richard Branson's Virgin Orbit or Virgin Galactic. I always forget which one is the rocket and which one is the tourist company.
Galactic flies the tourists.
Okay. So it was Virgin Orbit that was supposed to be the winning team, and Ashley didn't even include them into the book and didn't even spend time on them. And he said on the interview that he has met thousands of startup founders. He has been to countless rocket factories. And when he met Peter Beck and saw the Rocket Lab factories, he was like, this is something special, and these guys are going to make it. And I was actually surprised. Surprised by this, because he had to call the shots 7 years ago, when it was not at all clear that Rocket Lab would become what it is. And okay, I'm curious, your guys' thoughts on this. And I don't know, did you see the interview that I did with?
Yeah, I watched it this morning. I thought it was interesting. It was glad you're able to do that and share that with us.
Yeah, I'm very honored, and he's such an easygoing and very nice person to interview. And it's so interesting because it seems like I asked him about the finances of making a documentary, and he said that it's not a good business. I guess it's like being a YouTuber, that you're doing it for the love of sharing information.
Yeah, I can see documentaries not being big money makers. That would not shock me at all. So. But I mean, it was helpful for us. It was fascinating. Like a lot of people, I would have liked to see a little bit more Rocket Lab maybe in the movie and a little bit less Astra, but I understand he lives a lot closer to Astra than Rocket Lab. And it's kind of interesting seeing all the craziness going on there versus Rocket Lab. It's just like executing confidently. But it was an interesting interview. I would love to get kind of like a next gen version of this from him for the medium launch space. If we could see like, okay, now let's see Relativity, Firefly, and Rocket Lab go at it, and maybe dope. Stoke. That would be like amazing. So I don't know if he has that kind of access, but because I feel like at this point, Rocket Lab is pretty much one small launch, at least in the category of around 300 kilograms. There is, the 1 ton market, which is where ABL and Firefly are kind of looking. But I think small launch in the 300 kilogram range is like, it's over, at least in my opinion.
Say that again.
I don't think another rocket is going to come along and be able to challenge Electron with a similar mass to orbit capabilities.
Yeah. And what's crazy is, if you're a VC and somebody comes to you that I have no rocket experience, I need $100 million, and we can't compete with Electron, so we're not even going to try a small launch vehicle. We're just going to go for a medium launch vehicle. Would you give them money? Because it's so like if they can't develop a small launch vehicle for a limited budget and operate that successfully, how do you know that they can develop a medium launch vehicle? And the risk and money and everything is like orders of magnitude higher with the medium launch vehicle.
Yeah, this is that catch-22, right? It's technically speaking a lot easier to have a medium launch vehicle and operate it successfully, but it requires a lot more money to get off the ground. But until you've developed a small launch vehicle where the profitability is very difficult, how are you going to get the money to make a medium one? So yeah, that's what we saw Relativity do. They had one launch on their small one and then they canceled it. I think it should give Rocket Lab a leg up on, some of these other companies, the fact that they've been able to do this so profitably and like with so little margins on Electron.
Yeah, and is Stokes? I didn't know that they're starting with a medium launch vehicle.
Yeah, it's the smaller end of medium, you could say. So I think it's something like 4 or 5 tons. I have to double check that, but very interesting design. So smaller than Neutron and smaller than MLV to get to orbit, but they are hoping to be able to reuse their second stage as well, which would be quite a feat if they can do it on a vehicle that small.
Yeah. They're very interesting because they seem to be doing very well with very limited people and very little funding, and they have done a lot of progress. I'm curious if you guys have followed them or see it the same way as I.
Yeah, I think Stoke, from what I can see, they seem to be for real. I think sometimes raising too much money too early can actually be a hindrance. I think maybe Virgin Orbit could have fallen into that pitfall.
Yeah, and
they were lean and mean. They had all this money, so they bought all this fancy equipment. But Anyway.
Ashley said in the interview that when he visited the Virgin factory, he got super bad vibes, and with like how much money they got and how far they got with the rocket. And then he didn't deal with them anymore. I'm surprised he's not hired by, companies to do research on rocket companies, because he's really his experience.
I mean, he's a journalist, though. I'm sure there's all sorts of agreements in place for what he's allowed to disclose and what not, and he's not allowed to invest, which makes total sense. But yeah.
Yeah, somebody commented, let's ask him how much Rocket Lab his wife has.
That's a good question. His wife. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, Matt, do you have any thoughts on this subject or?
No, but I do agree. I think having a medium launch one would be really cool, but no, it was cool. I didn't finish the entire interview, but from what I did hear, the first few moments that I did, it was you guys had a really good conversation, and guys really down to earth, and yeah, I think I really enjoyed the part where you guys were talking about Chris Kemp, and he was talking a little bit about from his perspective versus Peter's perspective, and it was really interesting. So yeah, sorry, I have a little bit of a scratch in my throat.
I was kind of surprised, which I guess it makes sense because they have a relationship and have worked together a lot, but he's quite like defensive of Kemp, saying like, this is kind of how it is in startups. People make big promises and, try to execute. So he feels like maybe he gets a little bit too much flack. It's interesting to hear that kind of counterpoint.
I think to be fair, I agree. That is how most startups, I feel like, act, right? It's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of, trying to get people hyped up, and there's a lot to an extent. It's not like the old school Google or the old school, companies that really were bootstrapping their ways. And I forget what CEO it was, but I think it was the guy that they brought in to replace Larry Page as CEO of Google. But he was just like, when I came in, they literally gave me like a door to put not the door to put his desk on, but like a room with like 3 or 4 other engineers to share a desk with. to be able to. And he was just like, and what, you're thinking you're running $1 billion company, you get
I was
like
going
a
to say
fancy
Eric
office, and Eric Schmidt, thank you. And that's the sort of thing where you're literally using every dollar to be able to put it back into the company to try to get as much capital efficiency as possible, versus what you guys are talking about with Virgin Orbit and all these other things. When they're so well funded, they kind of lose that luster. It's kind of like how you can get and eat all your meals at Google now, and and I've cut back a little bit on that, but it's that luxury piece of just not necessarily having to strive to be able to build something, I think allows you to build inefficiencies, laziness, and unfortunately leads to a lot of failures. And so I don't want to say that's what happened with the Astra, but Astra, I remember when we were talking about this last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, their factory is fucking beautiful.
I know.
The rocket factory tour, and I think I posted the link in the chat, and I was
money
like,
that must have went into that, though. Like,
exactly, the money must have went into it. So it's not like they blew it all on like cocaine and hookers, right? I mean, they did legitimately, but to think like way that Peter would organize something, he would build something first, realize all the efficiencies that need to be made around it, tweak it, and then he would build the rocket factory around it. But it felt like they built the rocket factory first before they even really got 3 or 4 rockets into the air. And so it's kind of like putting the cart before the horse, and it just never really made sense to me. And so, I understand that sometimes it's like part of the allure of a startup is they're trying to grow really quickly, but you also have to base it on something that actually works, right? You can try to build Google as fast as you wanted, but if Google in the search engine didn't work and the algorithm wasn't really what people wanted, it never really would have taken off, right? And it still continues to work to this day, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't use it. So anyway, just my little food for thought.
But what's interesting is I had a very bad opinion about Chris Camp reading the book and then actually seeing the film. What's very interesting is they had rockets that were flying and almost making it to orbit, and they even had a successful launch, right? And I understand that at that point, if you're the company CEO, it's like, okay, because they actually, as far as I understand from the movie, they did the fastest rocket development on the smallest budget, or at least that's what they were telling investors. And somehow what has gone really wrong with them is the reliability. Like they didn't have somehow checks, and I'm not a rocket engineer, but it's also something that is like super hard to fix, because you lose all this trust with the customers. And if you lose 3 rockets, you have to launch like 20 times to just come back to like 95% like reliability, right? And that's just a very, very hard to come back from.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, just thinking about the whole Astra story and how it played out. I know London is quite smart, but I don't think I would invest in a space company whose CEO, like, I don't also think is very smart technically at the actual engineering, as opposed to just being like Chris, I think, is more of like a business guy. I think he used to be a software guy. But yeah, I want someone who's like extremely knowledgeable and like down in the details running a company if I'm going to invest in it.
Yeah, I agree. And one other thing is, you guys remember when the Falcon 1 had 3 failed launches? And then if you read, I think it was Ashley Vance's book on Elon Musk, where he wrote that when the 3rd launch happened, Elon Musk sent an email to the whole staff that, I know I told you we didn't have more money, but I ordered the rocket 4, 5, and 6, and we're going to launch in like 3 weeks, and I know exactly what went wrong, and we're going to make this go right? And the only difference between Musk and Camp was that like Musk made it go right. Like the launch after that actually succeeded, right?
Yeah. But ironically, like, I don't think Kemp was ever the one who was kind of in charge of these technical issues. So it's almost like it falls to London and some of those other guys. And, Kemp was doing the sales and hype. Well,
and he did a good job at it.
in some ways, as long as you don't go too far with what you're saying.
Yeah,
You see some of the videos where, like, you know, the rocket blows up and he's like, yeah, it was a great success. And so, anyway, but
okay, again, it's such an interesting thing when they launch what is it called, Starship, you know. And if you look at the live launches, and they're like, we just want to clear the tower, you know, and the payload is data, and you know, then the first launch, like, it left the tower and then it blew up, like it blew up on separation, I think, right? And then you watch the SpaceX live stream, and then they're like, this was a success because we were thinking that it might blow up on the stand, and we actually did the mission objectives. And I'm like, what's the difference between the two? It's quite similar, right?
That's interesting. I would have to look more into Astra's philosophy, but I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like SpaceX has really mastered this iterative, you know, putting like something on the pad, launching it, learning from it, fixing it. Where, yeah, I don't think Astra really had that kind of as much of an iterative approach, maybe.
Yeah, they had the sideways launch. That one is
that will go down in history.
That one was definitely interesting.
Infamous.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it makes me think a little bit. I mean, I'm with you. And I read this or watched this the other day when Elon was getting interviewed by Everyday Space or Everyday Astronaut. I forget who it was. And they have like the next 3 or 4 starships like in one tower, just like waiting to be launched. And he's like, we know, like they have a backlog of what they're trialing and what risk and uncertainty they're trying to mitigate with each of these rockets. And so it's like they'll tweak that for that risk, they'll tweak that for that risk, they'll tweak that for that risk. And if anything happens, they'll be able to like slowly on number 7 be able to tweak number 7 for the previous several that have been. So it's like it's really a step phase approach. And to me, they fortunately have the capital at this point to burn through to be able to do that approach. Versus it felt like they were almost trying, like Astra was almost trying to succeed day one. And it's like, you know, you have to fail a little bit before and give yourself the opportunity to fail, because it is rocket science at the end of the day. So anyway.
Yeah. I guess SpaceX at least is in the position where they can fail as much as they want on Starship and learn from it, but Astra wasn't.
Maybe that is the difference, that they have the capital, that it really doesn't make any difference if they fail or not fail. So talking about things not going right, did you guys see this brutal news?
Too bad we don't have any footage of that, but that their launch pad, I believe, not very easy to get to, but that's a sad way for a rocket to go down or get destroyed.
Especially for a startup, because you get zero learn, because you know, if you launch and then it fails mid-flight, it's like data, like what went wrong. But here you just
you don't learn anything. I don't know. One of the ABL founders actually made a very extensive blog post on all these upgrades they made on the new version of their RS-1, and it's very extensive. So I did feel like relatively good about this new version of the rocket, but so it's a weird accident.
Yeah. Those who are wondering what ABL is, it's a California rocket company, and their sales pitch, if I understand it correctly, is that they're able to make the launch infrastructure into containers, and they can launch from anywhere very, very fast. But Dave, you seem to be more into this than I am. Did I summarize it correctly, or did I?
Yeah, I think so. The containerized approach, it's like a 1-ton-ish rocket, I believe. So kind of on the level of the Firefly Alpha, which is, you know, significantly bigger than Electron, but still small launch. Not reusable. And they do have some pretty good contracts behind them and some support from Lockheed Martin, I believe.
Yeah. Lockheed Martin is one of their supporters. Okay, good. I I had some other space news, but I think we did better than I thought on certain subjects. So I want to just skip to the last subject that I wanted to take up, which is Q2 earnings is coming very, very close. What do you guys think is going to happen on Q2 earnings? What are your projections, and how is there things that you're afraid of? And how do you think the stock price is going to react?
It'll probably be down just because down on no news. I don't know. I think with Rocket Lab, in terms of the actual numbers, the earnings are usually pretty boring. Like they usually hit their guidance because the earnings calls come so late. So I think we have 105 to 110 million revenue. So it should be somewhere in there, maybe in the middle. And yeah, we had the 4 launches, so we shouldn't get a beat on the launch side. So probably what they were saying, 28 to 29. And yeah, we'll see how those margins go. Maybe there's a little bit of upside there. And then on the news, they usually announce a few new contracts. I'd love to see some more Neutron pictures. I'd love to get some static fire video if we don't get anything before then. I think worst case scenario is if Peter Beck goes on and says there's some kind of a delay with Archimedes, but that doesn't seem likely at this point.
Yeah, I think let me just see. So they were expecting 105 to 110, majority of which 70 or so percent coming from, maybe a little bit more coming from space systems, 28 to 29 million coming from launch. So I think that'll probably be okay. I don't know. I anticipate they'll do well. I agree. I'm hoping they can continue to get the non-GAAP gross margin still to hang above 30. We've heard Spice talk about that quite frequently in the previous earnings call about how they're seeing less and less space systems contracts below 30, but they're still working through the previous backlog of legacy contracts. So hopefully we get to a point where that grows. The things that I'm looking forward to most is updates on, are they ready for Launchpad 3? They still had some minor things to tidy up with respect to the warehousing. It looks like now they're in Warehouse 3 based off of some pictures I've seen. So I'm curious to see if they announce that is fully done. The pad's ready. The water tower's up. They noted a lot of that in 1Q, but I'm curious if they could put a big check mark next to that. Hot fire test, I'm expecting to find out that that's a positive. On an upside, I'd like to hear a little bit more about crap, I just had it on the tip of my tongue. So like you stated, Dave, some of the previous contracts, like I know some of the contracts last year that they had kind of gotten some inklings about that they weren't able to kind of tell us about, they were finishing up. And I know Vince was trying to get them to answer after the end of 1Q about some of the details of those contracts. So hopefully finding out some more of that. Hoping to hear a little bit more about the acquisition or that they're closing in on it. I don't think that they'll announce it, but maybe they will. I doubt it, but I'm anticipating they're getting closer towards something with that. But I think on a downside case, hearing negative about the hot fire test would obviously be the downside, and that's what I'm most fearful of. But I have very low likelihood chance in my kind of mental model that would actually occur. But I mean, it is still rocket science, right? So there's still a 5 to 10% chance of that being a reality. So I'm 90% positive that they've had some sort of variation of a hot fire test that they'll report on in Q2. From a stock price perspective, I don't think that any of these catalysts are enough. I think if anything, with a hot fire test, you might see a short-term bump to the stock, but I don't think it's sufficient enough that it would change the trajectory of the movement in the price. So I think if anything, you would see a quick pop-up for a day or two, but people would probably sell on the news after that happens. And I think we'd probably end up in the range of $5 to $6. I think that while it is a point that will help provide a tailwind to the stock, there's still too many headwinds from a capital exposure risk with respect to Neutron we're still too far away, almost a year out from that. So, as you start getting closer and you actually get a Neutron rocket on the pad and tested, not even just like launched, but just tested with, static firing, etc., then I feel like you'll get a lot more of that headwind removed. And then somebody in the chat, I know this isn't Q2 related, but somebody in the chat was saying, do we think it's going to be successful? I think it'll get to the first stage successfully. Second stage is always kind of a question. I always get fearful about the second stage light ups personally. But do I think that they'll land day one? I don't think that they'll land the rocket day one, but I'm very curious to see how that part of it gets executed. And while I would be extremely ecstatic if they did land it day one, that would just show the engineering marvel that Peter and the rest of the team are. I'm curious to see how many tries it takes them, because it did take SpaceX quite a few iterations before they were able to make it work. But I think that maybe they have a better success because it was built in day one versus the Falcon 9. It was retrofitted, right? So there's potential for, some ability to maybe shorten the learning curve with respect to learning how to be and land a rocket now that SpaceX and several others have kind of gotten to that place.
Yeah, not to I understand why you're looking for 650, Curtis, but I'm almost starting to hope now, because my wedding is coming up very soon, which is obviously, as you guys know, a lot of money, and I've been thinking more about adding more shares. So I'm kind of hoping that it goes back down and I can bump my share count up even more, like after the wedding and big spending is out of the way. But I don't know. I can't root for it to go down, so we'll just see what happens. But if we're still in the $5 range and they're getting ready to roll Neutron out to the pad, I think at that point I may have to add very heavily. So we'll see.
Vince, are you adding?
No, I'm trying to fill up my account. As you know, I got the last bit on margin. So my mission right now is to pay that margin back. Yeah. And then I might add, what Dave was saying, if we're still in the $5 and they're rolling Neutron out to the pad and there's new contracts and there's rate cuts, and then the price just doesn't make any sense. But I don't know if we would get that lucky that the price would be.
I'm so what am I for my target? I want to get to 25. I'm at 17 and change. So what is that? That's 8,000 shares. So 8,000 times 5.
Did you guys see that?
That's a lot.
Did you guys see that Curtis made a table for the known retail investors and their positions, and there is 2 whales that have 160, one of them has 160,000 shares and the other one was 140,000. That's pretty good.
Yeah, there's a few guys out there I've talked to before with large share counts.
Can you imagine a 10% move on the stock is $100,000 change in the?
I was chatting with someone. I don't think he'll care, but anyway, I won't say who, online, who had a very large number of AST shares, which we saw that chart go from 2 to 18.
Whoa.
Over 100,000 shares. So I'm sure he's pretty happy right now.
Oof.
Yeah, I'm 8,000 shares away from my goal at 25, but there are several positions in my portfolio that I'm looking to potentially trim because they've just been auxiliary positions, and I think that the money would be better used either in the SPY or potentially Rocket Lab. And so with that, I can see myself getting closer to 25 with those several companies, but to 25,000 shares, I don't know. But what I will say is I do plan on trimming some of my Bitcoin holdings when it does peak in the first half of 2025, which I'm still cautiously optimistic that it will. And when it does, maybe I'll use some of that, like you were saying, Hot Dave. If the price is still below probably $6 or $7 before Neutron launch, I'll probably continue to be adding myself. So
I know people may not want to hear this, but I think there's a chance it will be, because we've heard that, spending will kind of peak towards that first launch. So, the profitability of the company will probably still look pretty similar until that first launch happens.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm curious, because I think we all agree that the earnings, like the past numbers, are going to be really good. I'm really worried about guidance because of the launch, how that's going to go, and are we going to reach the 400 million in this financial year? I'm a little bit curious about their backlog because there wasn't any big contract announcements. But at the same time, did you guys see this tweet by Tim? It was some weeks ago when he said that it's a coincidence that the earnings is on the 8th of August, and the PWSA Tranche 2 transport layer Gamma satellites would also be announced on the same day. And that contract might be another like $500-600 million contract, and that would be a very nice boost on earnings. Coming as a Palantir shareholder who also has a lot to do with government, they can change these dates. The government can say that it was supposed to be August 8th. We need more time. There can be a lot of delays, and Rocket Lab is one of 4 companies bidding for this layer. Do you guys think that there's a chance we get this? How real is it? Or let's just not get the hopes up and go into earnings and be positively surprised if this happens.
Do we have confirmation that Rocket Lab has submitted a bid for this? Or I think it's mostly speculation, but it could be accurate.
I mean, okay, you're right. We don't have confirmation, but like Adam Spice in many interviews have said that they are in for similar contracts to.
Yeah, you're right. He said similar size, so that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Do we
I think
know?
he said they might not win the first ones, but they definitely want some of them.
Yeah. Last year, was their earnings date on the 8th, or was it?
Yes,
I
checked.
Okay, so it may just be a coincidence then.
Yes. I actually checked this, made a video about it when this tweet came out. I think last year was exactly on the 8th. The year before it was like on the 10th of August. So it's I'm sure they were not planning it. Planning to have it. Yeah. But if that would happen, then it would be a very great earnings for us. Yeah.
We will see.
Yeah. So I mean that's my main concerns on the earnings is actually like, how is Wall Street going to, because I know I love the stock, right? But how is Wall Street going to react to, like, if the guidance on the launches is a little bit less, if the backlog maybe goes down a little bit, but they say that there is big things in the pipeline. So yeah, it's a coin flip if the stock is going to go up or down.
I think it also depends on if it can attribute itself. There's going to be positive and negatives about what I'm about to say. There's going to be positives being that if HASTE works well, then the company will kind of emerge more of this, say, rocket technology defense company, or however you want to spin those 3 words together. But it'll help depressure the fact that space is an inherently volatile industry with a lot of bankruptcies, and defense, on the other hand, we're always more willing in the US to spend more on defense. So there's that piece. But the second time is sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, it just froze for me. I was sorry.
Okay, sorry. And at the same time, though, I feel like you could get crazier multiples with space if people view you in the right light. So I feel like it's a positive and a negative. If HASTE goes really well, you obviously get additional revenue, you get the Department of Defense, and then help kind of rebrand the company a little bit in terms of what kind of industry they're in. But at the same time, that might be a hindrance because the company is mostly focused on space and not subspace, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, guys. I think we discussed everything that happened this week. was a very good episode. I really enjoyed having you guys on. Is there any closing thoughts you want to say before we end?
See you guys for the earnings call. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Is anyone
and-
live streaming the launch on the 30th? I think is the next one.
I'll try to. I don't know if you guys want to be.
Depending when it is, I'll be all
I have
right.
to check the time. If it, odds are it won't be a good time for me, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's the same for me. If it's in a good time, I'll try to live stream it. And thank you guys so much for the super chats. Greatly appreciated. But of course, it's not expected. But yeah, very much appreciated if you do. Yeah, see you guys next week and then on earnings. Thank you.
Thank
and
you,
bye-bye.
Beth.